Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Delighted to welcome you to our session today, which is entitled Network Evidence for XDR. Your presenter is Ed Smith. He's Senior Product Marketing Manager with Corelight. But before I turn this over to Ed, let me give you some background on our discussion today. XDR, Extended Detection and Response, promises to integrate data from any source to stop today's sophisticated and often automated attacks. The key is which source. In this session today, you'll get insights on why network evidence must be a key part of the XDR strategy. Topics to be discussed include how to gain complete visibility into your network and cloud traffic, how to improve response time, and how to reduce complexity. You'll walk away with new ideas on how to stay ahead of ever-changing attacks by using a data-first strategy for detection and response. Now, some background on Information Security Media Group. We are a global education and intelligence firm, just about to turn 16 years old. Our headquarters is in Princeton, New Jersey in the US. And we you might know us best by one or more of our 34 media properties. These include bank info security, healthcare info security, and data breach today. In all, we reach an audience of over 1 million security leaders, and we give them a daily diet of news, analysis, research, events, and educational programs exactly like this one. Few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Ed during the course of this session, you can submit them anytime by the chat window on your screen. We won't be able to get to every question, but for those that we can't respond to in the course of this session, we will get responses back to you after via email. Should you encounter any technical issues while viewing today's webinar, please take down the email address on your screen. If you write to webinars@ismg.io, we do have technical support staff standing by to help. Also, a reminder, today's webinar is copyrighted material. That means it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you'd like to use any of the information presented today, or if you're looking for customized training material, please contact us. Delighted, of course, to introduce our sponsor, Corelight. Corelight provides security teams with network evidence so they can protect the world's most critical organizations and companies. On-prem and in the cloud, Corelight's open network detection and response platform enhances visibility and analytics, leading to faster investigations and expanded threat hunting. And of course, our speaker is Ed Smith. He's Senior Product Marketing Manager at Corelight. He's got 7 years of experience working in the cybersecurity industry, representing infrastructure as a service, DevOps, and vulnerability management solutions, including his most recent roles as Director of Marketing at CloudPassage and Senior Product Marketing Manager at Tripwire. With that, let me turn you over now to Ed. Ed, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Excited to be here. Figured I would kick us off with some interesting statistics that underscore some of the challenges that security operations teams are facing. When we look at the volume of alerts that the average SOC analyst has to deal with, we're seeing that 45% of the alerts that are coming in are turning out to be false positives. And even more concerning, we've found from this recent report from IDC that 35% of SOC analysts end up ignoring alerts when the queue gets too full. So there's a lot of alerts coming in, not enough time to deal with them. And what that overload of alerts is leading to are situations where things aren't being detected. So if you look at the most recent Verizon DBIR, more than 17% of breaches go undetected for months. Now, I've been in this industry coming up close on a decade, and I'm glad to see that these numbers are improving. So this statistic is better than the 60 to 80% that we may have seen 10 years ago, but definitely still some room for improvement. And another interesting statistic is when these breaches are discovered, they're not always found by an internal team member or the security operations team. Occasionally, 41% of the time, these breaches are being detected by an external source. So you have the FBI knocking on your door, or maybe your financial payment processor if you're transacting with credit cards. they're the ones that are finding these breaches in some cases instead of finding them internally. So again, glad to see these numbers improving, but still a lot of room for improvement. And so I think it's no wonder that organizations are looking for new approaches to keep up with these challenges and the changing security landscape. So I think that's why there's been a lot of interest in solutions like XDR, which we're here to talk about today. So let's dig into that a little bit. So XDR, extended detection and response, somewhat of a new term in the industry. Different vendors, different analysts have different definitions of what XDR is. I'm not going to spend today's session telling you what is XDR or what isn't XDR, but I do think it's interesting to compare the XDR concept to another concept that's been around for quite some time, which is the SOC Visibility Triad. And this is a concept that Gartner came up with. And really the idea here is that you have three critical components for a security operations center. The first is EDR, or endpoint detection and response. That's going to give you a lot of breadth of information and data and evidence from the perspective of the endpoint. The second piece would be the network, or network detection and response. This is providing breadth across virtually all of the devices in your environment, providing visibility that enables SOC operations. And then the third piece would be some sort of an analytics platform that ingests the data from both of these sources. That could be XDR, that could be a SIM, that could be some sort of a data lake, a place where the telemetry and the alerts from multiple attack surfaces are consolidated into a central analytics processing engine. And really my point with all of this is that these pieces are critical, starting with the endpoint. The endpoint is probably the best source of telemetry. It's probably the first control that needs to be in place in this triad. And then network is the second most important. And then from there, you can add on additional data sources like identity or cloud in addition. But really the two critical pieces here are endpoint and the network. So let's drill down a bit further into those two. When we think about these two sources of data, endpoint and network, and where there's overlap between the two, that's ideal. That's where we can see the real truth of what's happening in our environment, where we get both maximum depth of coverage and maximum breadth of coverage. So let's drill into that a little bit more. What do I mean by depth and breadth? So with endpoint telemetry, you're getting really deep, detailed information about that particular host. You are seeing things from the perspective of that endpoint. So once you get that endpoint agent or data collection installed, you're getting really good evidence because you can see everything that's happening. It's kind of like being able to read somebody's mind. You can see everything that's going on. Now with network, on the other hand, this is broad coverage because you can cover, you can gain visibility into basically anything on your network. There's no need to have an agent installed. If it's communicating on a network, we can see that communication and we can capture evidence from that. So if we think about that a little bit further, the reason for that is that with EDR or endpoint telemetry collection, oftentimes relies on an agent. So a piece of software installed on the endpoint that's reporting back information about what it's seeing. There are some situations where that agent is not available. Perhaps the device doesn't support running an agent. If it's an IoT device, unsupported operating system, something like a smart television, can't really install software on that, or industrial control systems, not suitable to put an agent on there if you don't want to affect the availability of that type of a device. And then even in situations where an agent could be installed, there are times where it's not feasible to install. Perhaps in a BYOD device, like a student bringing their laptop onto the campus network. Or maybe it just gets missed, the agent was never onboarded. Or maybe the agent was installed, but it's been disabled unintentionally, or maybe it's been tampered with by a malicious attacker that's trying to evade detection. When we look at the network, we're getting that broad coverage, but using a passive approach, where we're simply watching what's happening on the network. There's nothing to install on the endpoint. There's nothing that can be disabled. And it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to evade network detection, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. Another interesting perspective is when we look at MITRE ATT&CK coverage. For those of you who aren't familiar, MITRE ATT&CK is a detailed listing of the techniques and the tactics and procedures that adversaries are known to use. And if we have visibility and detection in all those different areas, we're much more likely to catch and stop attacks. So if you think about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it somewhat goes from left to right during this different stages of an attack. With endpoint telemetry, a lot of that coverage is really strong on the left side of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So things like initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, especially, these are things that you get a really good viewpoint from the endpoint in being able to find and see those things. With network, on the other hand, things tend to skew more towards the right side of the attack framework during the later stages of an attack, providing really good visibility into things like lateral movement, data exfiltration, that data almost always is being exfiltrated over a network, and command and control, C2, especially if you have an attacker that's remotely controlling a host, chances are that C2 communication is happening over the network. And then finally, another interesting comparison between the two would be indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, being able to find those indicators on the endpoint. You'll find things like the processes that are running, users, registries, applications, file hashes. And then on the network, things like IPs and domains, URLs. And where these two overlap, there's also a great opportunity for intel sharing between both solutions. So if the endpoint sees something concerning, it can share that with the network and vice versa. And you can really extend that coverage looking for these IOCs, looking for these IOAs, no matter where they're occurring, using both sources. So let's take a deeper dive on network evidence. Why is network evidence so important? When you think about an attack, virtually all attacks must cross some sort of network. And in doing so, that leaves a trail of evidence, which is especially important in situations where you may have other defenses in place that could fail. No matter what, if that attack is crossing the network, your network provides an opportunity to catch evidence, to catch the fingerprints, to catch the footsteps of that attack. And that evidence is very valuable because when we think about other detection and other defensive tools, things like threat intel, things like threat detection, these can generate false positives. They can also sometimes miss actual threats, like the SolarWinds and Log4j attacks. Endpoints, for example, can be exploited. Your endpoint source could become an unreliable narrator if an attacker has compromised and now has control over that host. With the network, it can't lie. It provides a source of immutable truth, and even when that traffic is encrypted. And this evidence helps us perform and makes our operations more efficient, more effective. So I'm not saying that alerts aren't necessary. Alerts are necessary, but by themselves are insufficient. With evidence alongside those alerts, you then have objective information that can help make faster and more precise decisions. And really, this is providing an asymmetric knowledge advantage where you know something that your attacker doesn't, and you're really not giving them any place to hide, because if they're crossing the network, you have visibility of that. There's no shadows to hide in on the network. And then finally, using that knowledge to drive disruptive defense. So what do I mean by disruptive? I'm talking about things like proactively threat hunting, not just waiting for that alert, but going out and looking for those indicators on your network. Automating the response. So we're dealing with all of these false positives. How can we use network evidence to understand what's a true false positive and what actually needs our attention? And also proactive defense in the form of customized network-based detections that are unique to your organization, especially important for large enterprises and nation states, where if you have an advanced persistent threat that's coming after you, just using general detections for generic detections for any company probably isn't going to cut it. If that person is coming after you with a custom tailored attack, chances are that having a custom defense and custom detection strategy can help you thwart that type of an attacker. So when we talk about this evidence and we talk about alerts, I think there's a difference between a difference in strategy. And this is what we've seen based on the customers that we work with in the community, that there tends to be two different strategies. One is more of an alert-based strategy, and the other would be an evidence-based detection strategy. And that evidence-based detection strategy is put in place by defenders that really see that evidence as the heart of security and protecting their organization. So with that evidence, these evidence-based defenders really try to understand their environment. And then from that understanding and from that visibility and awareness, are able to ask for opinions in the form of security analytics and alerts to respond to threats in their environment. Thinking about these alerts, these can and will be evaded. So having alerts that are based on evidence can help you improve the quality of those alerts, where you can fine-tune them and adapt them and make them perform better using the awareness and the evidence that you're able to collect from your environment. In addition, that evidence, once we know it is a true positive, can help with triage and being able to respond to that incident. And the other another important part here would be collecting all of this evidence for a stronger defense tomorrow. So if we know that these threats are going to bypass our alerts, we need to start capturing evidence today, so when the next 0-day happens, we're able to go back and see what happened. So if we're not collecting and analyzing that evidence, if we're not doing that, then we're not going to be able to analyze in the future when we need to go back, look back in time when the next 0-day hits. And then with critical security incidents where speed and effectiveness is very important, that evidence helps drive that response and make it more faster and more effective. So let's take a look at a couple examples. I think these are two examples most of us on the line today are probably familiar with, in terms of the Log4Shell vulnerability and the SolarWinds Sunburst attack. Thinking about the scope and severity of these vulnerabilities, SolarWinds reported that 18,000 of their customers had downloaded compromised versions. And with Log4Shell, given the widespread use of Java and that logging framework, I think it's safe to say that virtually every organization was infected in some way or another. And remember that alerts themselves are necessary, but by themselves are insufficient. And in the case of these two 0 days, every detection-focused vendor failed to identify these threats, whether it was EDR or IPS or an IDS. However, they were ultimately uncovered by curious individuals who had access to the right evidence. And I'm talking about security researchers. So in the case of SolarWinds, Mandy uncovered this threat and credited the network as playing a crucial role in finding that threat. And these are great examples of how you're using an evidence-based approach. You can rapidly identify, rapidly investigate past attacks, past exploitations. And in the case of these two events, without that visibility, you may be left struggling to determine if you were even vulnerable or not, let alone was it actually exploited? What was the scope? When was I first affected? What happened to us? Those are all questions that evidence can answer. And then the other aspect would be the power of community. For both of these incidents, within hours, we saw a comprehensive set of detections, signatures, behavioral rules that were developed and freely shared by the OS community, which when we're working together as a community, that helps us really respond quickly and effectively to threats like these. Okay, so what exactly do I mean by network evidence? And I like to kind of simplify things down into three buckets. So the first would be alerts. So for example, a IDS-like alert. So the Suricata, the open source intrusion detection solution, is a great example of something that can provide alerts. In addition to alerts, you have things like inferences, things that don't look right, but aren't necessarily flashing red light, this is bad. And those could be things that leverage behavioral analysis or machine learning to find things like something that looks like a command and control communication happening on your network. Maybe there's a large file transfer or hands on a keyboard over SSH, things that in themselves aren't bad, but when you start to stack up those pieces with other evidence and other data, that can help form a much stronger signal for solutions like XDR. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by that in a little bit. The second category would be logs as a form of evidence. The great example here would be Zeek, which is a network security monitoring solution that produces a set of logs based on protocols and other network observations. There's some example protocols that you might be interested on the screen as far as DNS and SSL, RDP. There may be other types of communications with ICS and IoT or OT equipment. I also have application logs and server logs on here as another form of evidence that sometimes people use as a substitute for network evidence, but they're not ideal. And for many of the same reasons that we see with agents, is that they have to be turned on, they have to be set to the right level of logging. And in the case of application and server logs, usually they're not designed for security, so you might be missing critical details from them. And then finally, packets. And packet capture is great because you're saving every single packet that crosses the wire. Everything that happened on the network, you're saving it to disk. So if you want to go back and see exactly what happened, go look at the packets. However, that's a huge problem when it comes to storage, if you're storing everything that's happening on the network. So as an alternative to full packet capture, there are smarter packet capture solutions that allow you to capture just the packets that you need that are interesting. When we see something that's unknown, an unknown protocol, we can capture those packets. If there's a protocol or some other network communication, we don't know what it is, or let's just capture the first X number of bytes from every communication, from every network connection, because there's a lot of information that we can glean from that initial connection that occurs on the network. Now, what's really important with these three data sources is the ability to link them together, to make sure that they're tied together so that you're able to jump or pivot from one to the other. So if an alert comes in, can we see the corresponding logs for that event? And then if necessary, can we also then pivot to the packets that are relevant for that situation? All right, let's take a look at how these concepts are combined to support an XDR alert and workflow. All right, so the company I work for, Corelight, we are not an XDR vendor. We are a network detection and response vendor. So we do not have an XDR solution to show you. So in doing somewhat of a demo today, I've mocked this up in my slide, and we'll present this to you as somewhat of a generic user interface. So what we're looking at here is an example of an XDR detection. So this was a Metasploit followed by a brute force login attempt. And then we see that there are three indicators, three different pieces of evidence that are enabling this single detection. We have this masquerading executable, an encrypted Metasploit traffic, and multiple failed login attempts. And you'll notice in the domain column that we're tying together endpoint. We're tying in network, two critical pieces of evidence. And then we also have a third source, which is identity that helped us capture that brute force attempt. And so you'll see how these indicators are stacking up to form this detection. And any one of these alone may not be evidence of an intrusion, but together are forming a very strong signal. You may have noticed that I've tried to format these as hyperlinks, and that's because you, with evidence, it's important to not just have that detection, but also have access to the underlying evidence. So I can click now on this encrypted Metasploit traffic indicator, and we can drill down and we can see the details from that indicator. So now I'm not just getting an alert, but I'm seeing the evidence behind that alert. And this is important for me to understand what happened. Is this a true or a false positive? If it's a true positive, how am I going to respond to this? A couple interesting things I'd like to call out here. The first are the JA3 and the JA3S hashes. So these are fingerprints of a client or a server application that's communicating over TLS. So if we can gain visibility into these types of indicators, we can search for known bad. So if there's a known bad client application, it's communicating over an encrypted channel in your network, we can't see in that channel, but we know that we've seen this type of communication before, and it's not good. Another interesting field to call out here would be the certificate validation status. In this case, this was not issued by a certificate authority. This is a self-sign certificate. And then most importantly is this unique identifier or UID. And this is critical for being able to pivot from this connection to other related connections, so that as I'm investigating this alert and the underlying evidence, I can then pivot out to other pieces of information that are going to help me respond to this alert. And then the next part of an XDR workflow I'd like to show you would be how we can use network evidence and other evidence sources to visualize the attack using a graph view. So this would be the same incident, the same detection, but now we can see from a network graph view how the attack progressed. So we have, in this case, a malicious file that was successfully dropped and executed on workstation 1. So this is something that the EDR solution caught. And then we see the network is detailing a Metasploit connection between workstation 1 and this host that appears to be an adversary. From there, we see that same adversary host tried and failed to log in to workstation 2. And so you can see where the little green arrow is pointing there, that Metasploit connection was a critical piece of the puzzle that network evidence was able to provide that. So we are able to link that malicious executable connection with the failed login on the other workstation. So EDR is giving you that alert in the instant. The network is giving you the breadth and all of the evidence around that to help you understand that alert and respond to it. So we're talking about the network. A lot of you might be thinking, what about encryption? It's true. Most network traffic nowadays is encrypted. We estimate anywhere between 60 to 80% of it. Now, it is possible to do a break and inspect of the traffic, and if it's in clear text, then all of the above still apply. However, that's often not feasible to break and inspect. There's restrictions in terms of legal, privacy, technical, complexity, cost, and other reasons. So a lot of the organizations we work with, that's just a non-starter for them. What's interesting is that the use of encryption actually creates new evidence that security teams can use to understand and analyze these connections, even without decrypting, even without breaking and inspecting. So some examples, the fingerprinting of TLS connections that we saw on the previous slide. We can analyze the certificate details, looking for risky things, such as, is the certificate expired? Other things, RDP, remote desktop brute forcing, human keystrokes over SSH, find things like use of a Cyrillic keyboard. If you're seeing a Cyrillic keyboard on your US-based company at 1 in the morning, that might be something worth looking at. Another big question that comes up when we're talking about collecting network evidence. Yeah, that sounds great for your on-prem network, but what about the cloud? Where can I tap into the network in my AWS data center? I don't think Amazon will let you ship them hardware equipment and have them rack it in their data center. The great news is that there are native packet mirroring capabilities so that you can get the same network visibility for your cloud workloads that you get for your on-prem environments. And not only are you getting that visibility, but you're getting consistent visibility across on-prem and cloud, which when we look at a survey, a recent survey that we sponsored with SANS around, it was the SANS 2022 Cloud Security Survey, network evidence is a great way to address cloud IR challenges that a lot of security operations teams are dealing with. When you look at the first bullet here, or the first challenge, lack of real-time visibility into events and communication involved in an incident. Great way that's a great, network evidence is a great way to address that challenge. Difficulty correlating data and insights between on-premise and the cloud. Again, if you're using the same network monitoring, both environments, you're getting a consistent set of data. That consistent set of data can help you mature your forensics and IR processes, equipping different levels of expertise from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 with a good set of evidence that helps them in their IR. Lack of access to underlying log files and low-level system information. Network evidence is also, very low-level system information or information about the communication and what's going on in the cloud. Inability to acquire, consume, collected forensic artifacts. All great places for network evidence to help with cloud IR challenges. All right. So one last slide I would like to close with to just give you an idea of what this might look like when deploying a network detection response solution. As I mentioned earlier, with NDR, these types of sensors deploy out of band, feeding off of a live copy of network traffic. Oftentimes, this is fed from a packet broker or a TAP. In the case of cloud, we have the native traffic mirror. So deploying the right sensor for the right environment, whether that's cloud, physical, software, or virtual, to capture and analyze that traffic. And then from there, we see the output, which is our evidence in the form of alerts and logs feeding into our XDR solution. And then in addition, the network can provide not only the PCAP that I mentioned before, but also file extraction. So capturing a copy of a file that's transferred over the wire, which can be useful for malware analysis, upload that to VirusTotal, see if there's anything malicious going on there. And then we also have the blue arrow in terms of a feedback loop. So this goes back to the sharing of threat intelligence, indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, back with the network, so that something malicious is found, or potentially malicious, that we're not waiting for that information to come into the XDR, come into the SIM. We're actually looking for that at the point of observation, so we can find those indicators earlier and catch them right when they cross the wire, cross over the network. All right, so to wrap up, a couple of closing thoughts for you. Endpoint, very important, very necessary, but endpoint alone is not enough. You do need the endpoint, you need that depth. However, network is also needed to provide you with the breadth of visibility for all of the devices on your network. Number two, the network fills those visibility, not only fills those visibility and detection gaps, but also improves signals for XDR detection. So as we saw earlier, it's not just the malicious executable and the brute force attack, it's that Metasploit network connection. Having those pieces, being able to tie them together gives you the full story of what happened. And number three, the network can't lie. You get the evidence of what happened. You see the details of what really happened. You get those fingerprints and those footprints. There's really no way to cover your tracks when it comes to network evidence. And then number four, this is a durable advantage in terms of using network evidence. It's an advantage that gives you a leg up over the adversary, allows you to set up hunting, allows you to set up automation, allows you to customize detections for those threats that are targeting your environment. So you can stay ahead of those advanced attacks, and then quickly investigate, remediate risk. And not only today, but for the past as well. So when those next 0 days hit, you have that evidence library to go back to and respond and understand exactly what happened. And then just to wrap up, real quick summary of Corelight. We're an open network detection and response platform. We consider ourselves open because we're built on open source technology, backed by over 20 years of development, with working with elite defenders, and really believe in the power of community and defending together. We're an enterprise class solution because we're used by the world's largest, most sensitive and targeted organizations. We've been around since 2015. We were founded by the creators and maintainers of the Zeek Network Security Monitoring Project, which is the gold standard for network monitoring. We are growing. We're also hiring. So if you like what you learned about today and you would like to join us, please head to our website. I think we have over 30 positions open. And that's it for me. I think we'll hand it back to Tom for Q&A.
Beautiful, Ed. Thank you so much. I appreciate your insights here. You've anticipated most of the questions I have, but let me just say this, attendees, if there are questions that you haven't had answered here, still can submit them via the chat window on the screen. We'll have what we haven't been able to answer today, we will get responses back to you via email. Ed, really the only question I have left for you, and it's an important one, where can our attendees go to get more information on the XDR and network evidence topics you were going through today?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me call out a couple resources. The first would be a threat hunting guide, which is if you just do a Google search for Corelight threat hunting guide, that should show up for you. And it's a really useful hands-on guide for using network evidence to do threat hunting. So what are some example searches that you could run? What are some things to look for? Very detailed, very comprehensive guide, a great resource for getting started with threat hunting using network data. And you don't have to be a Corelight customer to find value in that. Same concepts apply to the Zeek open source tool as well. And that being said, if you'd like to get really hands-on, we have a program called Corelight at Home, where if you have a Raspberry Pi, we have a free license that you can use on your Raspberry Pi to do network monitoring at home. Grab that, grab the threat hunting guide. I guarantee you'll find something strange or interesting on your home network, especially if you have a lot of IoT devices, a lot of smart devices at home. If you're looking for something a little bit lighter, there are some challenges on Splunk's Boss of the SOC. There's a couple of Corelight scenarios where you don't have to install anything. There's a Splunk instance, and there's some questions you can go search in Splunk and try to find the answers for those questions. So it's really a lot of fun and really great resources to get started with network evidence.
Very good. Ed, thanks so much for your time and insight again. I appreciate answering questions as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For attendees, thank you so much. We appreciate you took time out of your day to be here. Grateful for your attention, and do trust that today's discussion provided some excellent new perspectives to enable you and your organization to be even better prepared to deal with the XDR issues we discussed here today. I look forward to seeing you again on one of our upcoming sessions. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you for your time and attention.